Welcome everyone to the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation's April 2024 webinar, Building Trust in Elections Through Living Room Conversations. This event is co-hosted with two wonderful NCDD member organizations, the National Civic League and Living Room Conversations. I'm Kiva Hummel and I use she, her pronouns. I'm NCDD's Communications and Network Director, and I'm joined here today with my fellow co-presenters who will introduce themselves, starting off with Rebecca.
Hey everyone, Rebecca Trout here from the National Civic League.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie Kaplan. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of Engagement for Living Room Conversations.
Hi everyone, I'm Anais Maceda. I'm the Belonging and Inclusion Partner with Living Room Conversations. Oh, and I use she, they pronouns as well.
Wonderful. Next slide. So we're going to be using Zoom today, and we, as you can tell, are planning to share content on the screen. And so we encourage you to join us on your computer or device if you're able. The chat feature, which is the dialogue button located on the bottom portion of your Zoom screen and window, can be used throughout the event to post questions and make comments. We're starting the call with only the presenters unmuted, and whenever you would like to ask a question or make a comment, we invite you to please type it into the chat, or if you'd like to click the microphone icon in the bottom left to unmute. If you are on your phone, press *6 to unmute your phone. And when you are done, we do request that you please mute yourself again by pressing *6. This event will include a 1-hour webinar, which will be recorded. And at the 1-hour mark, we will then move into a 30-minute mini virtual living room conversation using the new Trust in Elections guide. This portion will not be recorded. Slides from the webinar will be emailed afterward and stored as a resource on the NCDD website. So let's get started. Next slide. NCDD, or the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, is a network of individuals and organizations who bring people together to discuss, decide, and collaborate on today's toughest issues. NCDD serves as a gathering place, resource center, news source, and facilitative leader for this vital community of practice. NCDD is committed to shared exploration of dialogue and deliberation as a means to improve lived experience, enhance public life, and strengthen democracy. In a time when our nation's dialogue feels strained and our democracy challenged, it is imperative that we come together to foster understanding, trust, and collaboration. Democracy, as we know, is a constant work in progress. And rather than succumb to its flaws, we choose to co-create its thriving future together. We recognize the historical divides that continue to impact us, yet we strive for inclusive communities where every voice is heard. As we stand on the brink of yet another election cycle, our goal today is simple: to equip you with practical tools and strategies needed to navigate tough conversations and to engage more confidently with one another, as well as to explore how we can make our election process even more fair and accessible for everyone. I now pass things over to our other co-host today, Rebecca Trout.
Thanks, Kiva, and thank you all for being here with us this afternoon. I just want to share briefly a little bit more about the National Civic League. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we are committed to advancing the ideas of civic engagement, good governance, participatory democracy, and collaborative problem solving. We do this in sort of 3 different buckets of work. We have our community assistance, where we help communities directly. Our research and publications, where we share out innovations that we've discovered and ideas that we have heard from around the country through our quarterly journal, webinars such as these, as well as through our Promising Practices database. And then probably what we're most well known for in my baby is the All-America City Award. And so we share out these ideas through the All-America City Award. This is primarily how we got involved in this month's webinar. We are focused always on dissecting and finding promising practices from communities that are using civic engagement and collaborative problem solving to tackle tough issues. And each year we pick a theme. This year being a clear election year, we were focused on how we strengthen democracy and how we do that by not waiting on federal action, but through local actions and innovations. And so you can see here on your screen, we have 20 finalist communities this year, and they're doing some really great and innovative work around some of the topics that you see on your screen. But one of the reasons that we wanted to be involved today is because elections are the backbone, the foundation of our democracy. And we know that a fair portion of residents and citizens in this country do not trust or have faith in our elections, whether that is for historic reasons or more modern polarization and misinformation reasons. It's there nonetheless. And this tool that we're going to discuss from Living Room Conversations is a really great piece of the puzzle of how we begin to kind of tackle this issue. So excited to dive into this more with you today. And now we'll introduce our friends from Living Room Conversations, Annie and Anais.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Anais and I are going to be talking about how to build trust within our communities around elections through Living Room Conversations. So Anais, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Anais. I'm the Belonging and Inclusion Partner. And today I'll be delving into why belonging and inclusion are important principles to incorporate into building trust in elections. So let's get right into it. Okay. So voting is a fundamental civil right. And although the US prides itself on being a democratic nation, the country's voting history reveals the suppression of voting rights of marginalized communities. Let's take a quick journey through history and go to the next slide. So in 1776, the US established itself as an independent nation. The Declaration of Independence was signed. The US officially became a free democratic nation, but for some. Note that slavery in the US did not officially end until June 1865. In regards to voting, it was restricted only to property owners, which were mostly white Protestant men over the age of 21. Next slide, please. Around 1868, the 14th and 15th Amendments granted access to all U.S. citizens the right to vote, those born in the U.S. and naturalized, and that the federal and state governments could not deny the right to vote based on race. Yet, in 1876, the Supreme Court ruled that Indigenous people were not citizens and could not vote. Keep in mind, though, that some Native American tribes fought side by side with Americans during the Revolutionary War. It wasn't until the Snyder Act of 1924, which admitted Native Americans born in the U.S. to full U.S. citizenship, that they were able to participate in voting. And you can see here on the slide some cartoon drawings of 19th century illustrations showing Black men recently emancipated and participating in voting. And then also the other one here of a policeman ordering a Native man to move away from the voting polls. Next slide. Also, in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act denied people of Chinese ancestry the ability to become naturalized citizens, making them ineligible to vote. Mind you, though, between 1865 and 1869, before the Chinese Exclusion Act, thousands of Chinese immigrants helped to construct America's first transcontinental railroad. So you see, there's this pattern here of America's exploitation of marginalized communities. It's giving, hey, come and work with and for us, but you still aren't one of us. And see here, you can see that there's in the slide here, Chinese laborers working on the transcontinental railroad, and also a cartoon drawing of called Throwing Down the Ladder by which they rose, and show representing a wall to create division between Chinese immigrants and the US. Next slide, please. So even more so, barriers such as poll taxes, which is paying to vote, which continued well on into the 1960s, literacy tests, voter fraud, and intimidation were all used to deliberately reduce voting among Black men, Native Americans, all people of color, and low-income communities. And you can see here on the slide, there is a cartoon drawing of white mobs in red shirts prevented, quote unquote, voter fraud with guns, knives, and violence. And then also this is a poll tax flyer as well here. Next slide. So in 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, which granted women, white women, the right to vote. Black women and men continue to face barriers, which included violent beatings when trying to register to vote. Mind you, Black women played an active role in the suffrage movement. They participated in political meetings, organized political societies, and attended political conventions at local churches where they planned strategies to gain the right to vote. Black women did this despite the National American Women's Suffrage Association preventing Black women from attending their conventions. Even more so, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony featured white suffragists in the history of women's suffrage while largely ignoring the contributions of African American suffragists. And you can see here on the left, you have white women activists encouraging people to vote yes on the 19th Amendment. And on the right of the screen, we have some faces and names of Black women suffragists, like Sojourner Truth is a big name, Ida B. Wells, etc. Next slide, please. We going deep in the history, okay? So in 1965, the Voting Rights Act was signed into law by President Johnson, aimed to overcome legal barriers that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote. This was a big shift, right? It forbade states from enacting discriminatory laws that restrict people's ability to vote, such as literacy tests and poll taxes. It also required states with a history of voter suppression based on race to submit changes in their election laws to the U.S. Justice Department for preclearance. This was very effective in stopping the most discriminatory policies from going forward. The Voting Rights Act is considered one of the most far-reaching pieces of civil rights legislation in U.S. history. So from this point on through the 2000s, there were other advancements made, like the voting age was lowered from 21 to 18, voting material was offered in multiple different languages, and there were new voting protections for people with disabilities. And you can see here on the screen, there was marchers. This was during the 60s. And then you also see, and this is something I didn't know. I didn't know Martin Luther King Jr. had anything to do with the Voting Rights Act. So that was a big, exciting discovery for me. And you can see him here with Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act into law with other civil rights activists. So next slide. So even though we made those advancements in 2013, however, the Supreme Court eliminated the part of the Voting Rights Act which required states to get pre-approval to change their voting laws. This led right back to more acts of voter suppression. States like North Carolina and Texas created voter identification laws, which gravely impacted low-income and BIPOC communities. Other states like Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and Virginia soon followed. You can see here representing, or see on the screen, people protesting stop voter suppression, and then also signs of having your photo ID ready at voting polls. Next slide, please. So from this point on through the present day, voter suppression tactics such as purging voter rolls, limited polling sites, and gerrymandering continue. This was especially heightened during and after the 2016 presidential elections with claims of voter fraud, although only 4 documented cases of voter fraud were found out of 135 million ballots casted. So next slide. So closing all of this, why does all of this matter, right? Because efforts to suppress the vote remain present to this day. Equal access to voting is a civil rights issue and impacts the ability to truly create trust within elections. Can elections be fair and just when specific groups of people aren't represented? Democracy is where the supreme power is vested within the people, but which people? Who is actually represented here? Conversations around building trust in elections must also include equity and inclusion to work towards bridging and strengthening our relationships to one another, and to work towards addressing the barriers where those historically suppressed and marginalized from voting have equal access, representation, voice, and power. This is true democracy. And that's all I have for you all today. Thank you so much. I do have to hop off, but thank you all for having me, and enjoy the rest of the webinar, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much, Anais.
Thank you, Annie.
Yes. So, wow. As Anais said, talking about equity and inclusion when discussing trust in elections is absolutely essential for upholding democratic principles, ensuring fairness and representation, and strengthening public confidence in the integrity of electoral systems. If we're focused on elections being conducted fairly and freely, we must be focused on them being accessible to everyone and conducted without discrimination. So we cannot fully talk about trust in elections, or really anything for that matter, without talking about equity and inclusion. So thank you all for engaging with us around this. And in the spirit of living room conversations, we wanted to start off by having a quick conversation and a chance for us to talk to each other. So in a moment, we'll go into breakout groups to answer a question about our hopes for this upcoming presidential election. But before we do, I wanted to go over the living room conversation agreements. And although we won't be going into a full living room conversation right now, these agreements are how every living room conversation starts. They're essentially like the ground rules that create a container for healthy and respectful dialogue. And they just completely shift the tone of really any conversation and make communicating an intentional and conscious practice instead of just an unconscious reaction. Conversation agreements also give a preview of the skills that we practice in living room conversations. So I invite you to just take a moment to think about a conversation you wish you could have with someone, maybe a family member, friend, coworker, anyone in your life. And as we read these agreements, think about which one might make the most difference in being able to have that conversation. So Kiva and Rebecca, if you could help me read these conversation agreements, that would be great. I can start us off, and then Kiva, if you could take the middle row, and Rebecca, you can read out the third row, that'd be lovely. So the first conversation agreement is be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives.
Number 2, show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk.
Be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you are answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants.
Note any common ground as well as any differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise, and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others.
Be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you, speak from your experience, and be considerate of others who are doing the same.
And own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation in the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like the timeout sign if you feel the agreements are not being honored.
Thank you both. So this is the timeout sign, but you can really pick any sign for this. I know when we have these conversations on Zoom, sometimes people will use like the wow emoji with the big mouth, or you can even do like jazz hands sometimes. Your group can totally pick whatever works for you, but the intention of this agreement is to just have some signal that everyone agrees upon ahead of time, that if things get off track or start spiraling or getting really heated or charged, that we all have a signal we can use to just pause things for a moment. We can all take a few breaths together, go get some water, anything like that. Just pausing the conversation, and then coming back and regrouping and continuing on. But to just have a way out and a way to pause things if anything starts to get a little out of control, which sometimes when we engage in dialogue with each other, it's just this back and forth, incessant talking. And we all just need a moment sometimes to collect ourselves and to reflect on what's happening and notice what's arising within us. So that's the purpose of that conversation agreement. And when we're being mindful of these agreements, it completely changes the way that we converse with each other. So as people engage in the process of a living room conversation, they're acquiring and practicing these skills. And when I hold living room conversations like we just did, I like to have one person read out each of these so they can hear their voice in the room. And it's kind of the icebreaker people need to start talking with each other. Next slide, please. So now we'll take just a few minutes to go into breakout rooms here, 3 minutes total. So you will go in a breakout group with just one other person and answer this question. What are your hopes for the 2024 US presidential election? And this is a very quick conversation, but I invite you to just try to practice the conversation agreements we went over. And there won't be any crosstalk during this exercise. You'll take turns simply answering the question and listening to what the other person is sharing. Perfect. So yeah, I will see you all in just a few moments back here. So welcome back. Thank you for being willing to participate in that. I know that's not even close to enough time to talk about our hopes for the presidential election, but we will have a chance for another breakout group within this hour-long session, and then we're going to have more time at the end of the hour for another mini living room conversation. So I would love to hear some reflections just from that short conversation, but we'll have a chance to, at the end, to share some of those reflections. Okay, next slide, please. So to tell you about living room conversations, our background is that we are an organization in the bridge building movement with expertise in crafting effective and accessible tools for dialogue. We work extensively with individuals, organizations, and communities across the country to engage people in conversation and civil discourse. Next slide, please. And if we look at what keeps us out of conversation, a lot of it has to do with not feeling like we have the skills, confidence, or the opportunity to engage with people, especially people that think differently than we do. Living room conversations aims to open that door. Our model equalizes power dynamics by giving each participant the same amount of time and space to talk. Participants refrain from crosstalk during a living room conversation, so everyone can expect to have their turn to share and be listened to. Our model draws out personal stories, experiences, and narratives instead of opinions. We use shared norms and agreements to create a safe container for respectful and meaningful dialogue, as you saw through those conversation agreements. Our conversations build short bridges first. So we have 3 question rounds within our dialogue model that I'll go over in a little bit, but these question rounds build upon each other so that folks connect around our shared values before they even begin to touch on what they disagree on. And when you see you have shared values with someone, you're able to empathize with them. And this allows you to open yourself up to being able to truly hear and see this person as fully human with reasons for why they believe what they do, even if that's very different than what you believe. Living room conversations allow a culture of listening, respect, and friendship across differences to develop. They're highly adaptable to you and your community's needs. So we have a plug and play model that can be used with family or friends, with people at your place of worship, your community group, business, organization, library. Living room conversations work in really any setting. Next slide, please. So we partnered with the Fetzer Institute to conduct an 18-month study on the effects of living room conversations. They found that the immediate and long-term impacts of having even just one living room conversation is improved mindset, better listening skills, increased understanding of other perspectives, a greater interest in systemic issues, and a humanizing of people who we view to be the other. The impact on communities of practice who held regular conversations were that these conversations created a baseline of trust across ideological differences. They shifted power dynamics between different groups, and participants were really able to apply the conversation techniques that they learned in the living room conversations to other parts of their lives and conversations with other people. Trust and connection is easier built in local settings and communities. So if we want this systems change, we have to work at the grassroots level. So you're making this investment both individually as a member of your own community and society as a whole. Group conversations and dialogue play a crucial role in healing toxic polarization, which many, if not all of us, have seen an increase of in the last several years, both within our country as a whole, but also within our communities and maybe even our families. Conversations provide a platform for individuals with differing perspectives to come together, listen to one another, find common ground, and recognize our shared humanity. By engaging in open and respectful discussions, people can better understand each other's concerns, values, and experiences. These conversations help break down the barriers that toxic polarization creates, fostering empathy and building bridges between individuals and groups. They create spaces for people to challenge their own biases, expand their perspectives, and find shared solutions to complex problems. Living room conversations create spaces for constructive engagement where people can learn effective communication skills and also practice active listening. This helps to reduce hostility and animosity, promoting a more inclusive, respectful, and cohesive community. The National Governors Association has launched their new Disagree Better initiative aimed at addressing America's polarization problem, and they recommend using living room conversations as a tool to help bridge divides between individuals and groups. Next slide, please. Community conversations and these group dialogue programs can also be effective in countering the spread of misinformation. In many ways, they're a great way to build trust. These conversations create a space where people can engage directly with each other face to face instead of over Facebook comments or anything like that. And this personal interaction fosters trust among community members. And when people trust each other, they're more likely to question and verify information rather than simply accept it at face value. They also allow the sharing of diverse perspectives. As we know, misinformation often thrives in echo chambers where people are really only exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs. So community conversations bring together individuals with diverse backgrounds and viewpoints, and this diversity allows for a broader understanding of issues and really helps to challenge false narratives. By engaging in ongoing conversations, communities also become more resilient to misinformation over time. They develop networks where accurate information can be quickly disseminated and where individuals feel empowered to question and challenge misleading claims. Community conversations are also grounded in local contexts and address issues that are relevant to participants. So by focusing on specific concerns and experiences, these conversations can provide targeted responses to misinformation that directly impacts a community. So a recent trust and elections conversation I held, for example, consisted of a variety of people, but one of them had been a poll worker for years, and she described the whole process to us. So many people had so many questions, including myself, and she was able to answer them from her direct experience and speak from a local context. And that just completely shifted the way that everyone was able to hear this information. So when we use hyperlocalism to approach these issues, they just really hit home so much more. And when misinformation is identified, community conversations can serve as platforms for collaborative problem solving. Participants can use these conversations to brainstorm strategies for addressing misinformation within their community. Next slide, please. So as we all know, the 2024 presidential election is right around the corner, and the results are going to be questioned as they were last election. So we have created conversation guides and resources specifically on trust in elections so that you can be equipped to engage people in conversations around this topic. Now is the time when we still can work to ensure that the upcoming election is both trustworthy and trusted. If we start planning and having these conversations now, we have a chance to get ahead of this and build trust in our elections and each other so that no matter how this all unfolds, it doesn't break down our relationships, communities, and our country. So we can do this by talking to each other. In living room conversations, we focus on shared values, fairness, love of family, community, and country, respect for the dignity of our neighbors. Then we ask questions that encourage folks to be curious, learn about our electoral processes for themselves, and listen to each other to better understand folks' concerns. So we need to work together to assure ourselves and then others that our electoral processes and practices are trustworthy and run in a way that's free and fair. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll start going into the living room conversations model itself. Like I said before, we have a plug and play format that makes it easy for anyone to host a conversation. They are ideal for groups of 4 to 6 people. So as you can see in this photo of a conversation I held at Boulder Public Library, when we have community events, we just split people off into groups of 4 to 6 and set up multiple tables around the meeting room. These conversations are designed to last 60 to 90 minutes. They have a very simple structure with 3 rounds of conversation, and they're very intentionally designed to build understanding. We ground living room conversations in personal experiences. So our dialogue model is not for deliberation. We don't come to a consensus. We're not trying to reach any point. And these conversations are also not debates. They're really just a chance for us to listen to other people, share our experiences, and reflect and think about what next steps we want to take. Next slide, please. So now I'll get into the guide itself, what it looks like, and then we will all go into a mini living room conversation. So a formatted conversation is really disruptive. It helps us break our bad communication habits and equalizes power dynamics. It gives equal opportunities to contribute and participate. A format can also help folks get beyond their typical habitual patterns and learn to develop new, healthier ones. So as you'll see on the right of the screen here, this is what our Trust in Elections conversation guide looks like. There is also a back to this page, so this isn't the whole thing, but this is the front page at least. And every living room conversation starts off with a brief explanation of the topic, then introductions. You'll then go through our conversation agreements like we did at the beginning of this webinar. There's then 3 rounds of questions. The first round of questions are just getting to know each other questions. Things like what purpose or mission guides you in your life? What are your hopes for your community or your country? Things like that. And research shows that when we connect around shared values in this round, we're able to see our common humanity and cultivate compassion for another person. The round 2 questions are questions specific to the topic itself, in this case, trust in elections. And then the round 3 questions are reflection questions, just giving people a moment to pause and think about, what am I walking away with? What's the next step I want to take based on what I heard today? Do I want to continue having conversations? Do I want to volunteer to be a poll worker? Do I want to write a letter to the editor? Things like that. So it really gives people a chance to talk in community about what they want to do next. So it's a really great way to catalyze community organizing and people to continue taking initiatives towards fostering trust in elections beyond this conversation. And holding dialogue events and community conversations, especially around a topic like this at this point in time, can seem pretty daunting. So we've created these step-by-step conversation guides that make facilitating these conversations as straightforward as possible. You have all of the instructions, the timing, the conversation agreements, all of the questions laid out for you in these guides. And I like to just print out a copy for every single person in my conversation to have. So everyone is literally on the same page. There's no surprises. They know exactly what questions we're going to be going through. And I think that just really helps people feel more comfortable engaging in conversation around a topic like this. And then if you do want to learn facilitation skills to build your confidence in hosting these conversations and learn intervention techniques and how to address challenges that might arise, anything like that, we do also offer facilitation training on this. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we are going to spend the next 7 to 8 minutes in breakout groups. So each person can introduce yourself and then just choose one of these questions to answer. Either how do you define trust in elections and how do you experience it? Has it shifted over time? What could inspire more trust in elections for you? Or the second question, when you think about our voting practices, what hopes and concerns do you have for building trust in our electoral processes? And Kiva, would you be able to put these questions in the chat, please? Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, each person can take 2 to 3 minutes to introduce yourself and answer one of these questions, and then we will regroup in 7 to 8 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I think everyone should be back by now. Sorry to cut you off again. But I would love to just spend the next few minutes hearing from people. If you want to unmute and share what that was like, what the conversation was like, what are you walking away with, any reflections you have on that. Would love to take this time to hear from you all. And Sharon, I see your comment, not enough time. Definitely, definitely. These are normally designed to last 60 to 90 minutes. So in the interest of time, we did just want to give you a little taste of what a living room conversation is like. But yeah, we would love to have you stay on. We will be having a longer living room conversation at the hour. We'll have a 30-minute conversation. So I'd love to see any of you all in that. And Janice,
go ahead and answer your question.
Yeah, I'll brave and go ahead and raise my hand here. It's, the person I was sharing with, brought up, some of the voting practices of like not giving water to able to give water to people. I never, and it's like I never considered like we should consider all voters human beings and have a diversity of needs. It's like, oh, I just never considered that. And it's like, and what she brought up was perfectly obvious, but I've never had that. And it's like, oh, okay. And I'm just find myself being aware of much more now.
Beautiful. Thank you, John. Does anyone else want to share? Sandy, I see your hand.
Yes, that's one reason among many that I really like Washington State's practice of having all ballots submitted by mail, all ballots. They're verifiable. If you want a cup of water or even a chocolate, go out into the kitchen. You can get it anytime you need to. It also makes it possible to definitely verify that a vote was processed. People, the machinery doesn't know what you said in your ballot, but they know that it came in and it was swallowed by the system. And you can actually go online and see that it has been taken care of. So that's again, honoring and respecting every individual voter and vote.
Such a great point, Sandy. Thank you. Miss Evelyn Malone, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. I am so glad to be part of this. I've used your some of your ideas. I host an anti-racist conversations group, and I've used your ideas successfully, I might add. And one was on talking with people that are different from us. It came across, there are a lot of apprehension, but the way you have your questions designed is absolutely phenomenal. They're not overwhelming. They're not a lot. And they, to me, it's just like completely fitting. I'm thinking, how did they do this? There's so many different ideas available. So I've used them very, very successfully and looking forward to doing more. I was in a conversation with Jeff, and I think one of the things that I'm more focused on now is people have an access to vote, but what we're dealing with in this culture right now is apathy. And so when I think about that, I'm thinking this is ideal because people do not have an opportunity to talk. If we don't talk, we're losing a lot. And I'm saying that I'm from the civil rights era to where talking was part of it. I remember my parents having to pay the notorious poll tax to vote. And how dare we not talk about it more? We've got to have more conversations about voting and the importance of voting. Because if there are two people voting and we don't vote, we're giving it away. And so the way you have your ideas designed is just phenomenal. That's all I can say. I can repeat that over and over again. And I appreciate it. And I think I've sent you feedback on that. I hope I have. If I haven't, I will.
Oh, thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I don't know how I found you either, but I'm glad I did.
Oh, that just fills my heart. Thank you. And I could not agree more that we have to talk about these things. Yes. Thank you so much. And Tanya, I see your hand. So we'll hear from you and then we'll go into a Q&A.
Yeah, my thoughts from that conversation I had with my group concern trust and how that affects our election, right? The main takeaway is how do we promote trust? And we really came down to these ideas of transparency and adaptability, right? Being transparent about what information is out there, how it is accessible, and what we could do better at making these more understandable and accessible, right? Coming from a political science and speech communication background, I understand the history of voters voting in the United States, also how people communicate and how people have various ways of understanding the information available to them. So in order to promote voter turnout and overall understanding of what's uh, at play, we need to make this information widely accessible. Not only does it mean having multiple languages available, but it means breaking these down to a community level, right? Showing the community why in this particular policy, for example, may affect your community. It may seem that it won't, but it will. So being able to have that information readily available for our community in a way that's not so filled with this political and academic jargon, we're going to see an increase in voter turnout. We're going to see a trust in our political system and election system because they feel like, oh, I can now relate to the information available. I understand it. So now I can communicate it back to others and see their perspective as well. Really great conversation.
That is such a good point and just perfectly said, Tanya. Thank you.
Really well said. Now, Annie, we just had a couple other questions, and I recognize we are getting close. So if folks do have additional questions that I'm not able to touch in on, please feel welcome to send Annie an email here. She does have, Rebecca, if you want to throw up another slide with her contact information, you're welcome to send Annie an email if you have further questions or information that you're needing. So Shanna or Shauna had a question on who have you found to be most effective in hosting community conversations, ensuring that those who are most engaged show up?
Yeah, I would probably say libraries because they reach such a wide and diverse range of people. But I think it always comes down to outreach. It's never easy to get the people who are most disengaged at these conversations. So it always takes a lot of really intentional outreach and time to build relationships with those groups. Normally you can't just invite them and expect them to show up. It really does take time to build a relationship first so they trust you. And then once that trust is built, then they'll start coming to your conversations. But libraries are great for this and they have relationships with so many people. So I would definitely recommend partnering with your local library for something like this.
That's excellent. And Wes had a question of, has anyone ever used a simple timing device like a 3-minute sand timer or an electronic equivalent? If so, what?
Yep. So we love using the sand timers. They're great. And I see a comment that someone had used these and just gave them to everyone. So yeah, if you can set up tables, each one having a sand timer, that's wonderful. Also, just using people's timers on their phone is really accessible for people. And I normally like to have a timekeeper at each table if I don't have a facilitator at each table to just have someone volunteer to keep the time on their phone. So that's a great way to do it. Just set a timer, it goes off, so you don't have to interrupt someone, the timer does. That's, yeah, great way to do it.
Perfect, thank you. And we are at the top of our hour, and we are about to switch into our miniature living room conversation. Rebecca, will you give the slide go to the next slide, please. So I do want to quickly mention this webinar is in support of the National Week of Conversation, which is going to be happening next week. All of the information is here. These slides will be provided to you. We strongly encourage that you check out the National Week of Conversation. There is hundreds of events that are happening both online and in person. And I do apologize if other folks had any other questions. And we did share a lot of information with you. So thank you so much for your attention and your participation. I want to pause as we transition. We are going to stop the recording. If you'll go to the last slide though, Rebecca. I do want to say thank you all so much for joining us on this webinar, for sharing your insights and hopefully using this guide moving forward. Thank you all so much for being here with us.
And I do just want to add real quick,
Please.
As in addition to thank you so much, I did just want to make sure to mention that we're partnering with a research team to understand participants' trust in and intended actions towards the US election. So we will be able to compensate local organizing hosts and attendees who are willing to take a short anonymous survey before and after the Trust and Elections conversation. So if you are interested in hosting these conversations, please email me. I'll send you even more resources than are listed on our website. And then I can also give you some compensation for doing this. So definitely reach out if you're interested in that opportunity. But yeah, thank you all so much for your time, for your engagement, for your presence in talking about such an important issue.